Okay, we're going to get into the concept of King Menace, the original, what they say is the originator or unifier of ancient Egypt. But I want to start with this picture because the article starts with this picture, and it'd be a little incorrect to use this for it. Although it's a great display, it's at a public museum in Milwaukee at a exhibit they have there, and it's titled Egypt at the Crossroads of Civilization, right? But I mean, I could pick this thing apart like crazy, but I just want to say a few things about this. This wouldn't signify menace in any way because the things that are a little blurry, let me get my pointer here. The things that are a little blurry over here and over here are actually necks of a horse. Oh, well, no, it says Egypt on chariots at the crossroads of civilization. That's what it's called, something like that. But it mentions chariots. For the problem with that in horses that are here and that chariot that he's on here is that doesn't actually show up in the Egyptian record until the Hyksos show up, and that's like 15th dynasty. So it's surely not pre-dynastic coming into dynasty 0 1. So there is a problem with that if you want to use this picture for it. Oh, it's a good exhibit. The other problem I have is the ethnicity of this guy here. They quite often are making exhibits and art and everything that shows you a current modern admixed Arabic person. And that's not what the Egyptians were back in the day. Definitely not. For the admixed Arabic Turkic people, come much later. And I think that's well known, but they keep doing this. And that's really my only gripe about it. If you'll look at him here, it's kind of hard to tell, but he has a frocking, which almost looks like feathers all over him, but that's a frocking that's very much like the Sumerians have. But in the Sumerians, you see them wearing a skirt quite often that looks like that, but not a top necessarily. I also doubt that Narmer ever had a riding crop, although it's cool how they took it and put a wire in it and made it look like it's about to, whoosh, whipping the horses, getting him going. But that should be replaced with something that's a little bit thicker of a stick and has a mace head on it. And they could have just probably used a picture of the Narmer palette or something like that right here in this position, but perhaps they've used that up too much. And this is a cool picture, so not really against that. Also, this chariot that they have out there is extremely ornate here and goldified and raw sun disk and everything going on there. And there are mixed thoughts on that, that if they had that chariot like they found the one in King Tut's tomb that's so decorated, that wouldn't have been his daily chariot for sure. And at best, some people believe they might have used that during ceremonies. Other people said that they didn't use it at all. There was this one guy came out years ago and they said they would horse that thing up every day, but he'd never use it. But then eventually, when he did use it, it caused his death. So perhaps the wheel came off and he fell, and the other chariot ran over him. And the concept that they had, or something like that. And this is this Icarus concept, and the sun, and da 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 da. But I think that sometimes people putting too many things together. But hell, I love making connections. Let's make one here real quick. You see he's wearing a blue crown. It's got those little bumps all over it. Quite often they're seen with bumps all over it, but they're also seen with either turquoise or lapis lazuli, and it's little discs, little circles, little Cheerios, if you will, that somebody has made out of them, like beads, like around his neck. In fact, they're not the color of that blue, although the background is the Egyptian blue. They're about the color of the bluish turquoise that's around his neck right here, and they're all over that too. So we're familiar with seeing this, and perhaps some of the pharaoh statues that have those blue, tops onto them, and Nefertiti's head, she's got the blue crowns and so on going there. So what are the crowns of ancient Egypt? Well, the crowns of ancient Egypt are the red crown that we're familiar with, that has the little butterfly tongue coming out of it, and it's square topped more and looks a little more fez-ish. Ka-ding. But the white crown looks more like a bowling pin, and it really looks like the Sumerian crown that they have, except for if you took the horns off of it. So we have a red, white, and blue crown. Ding. There's a connection there. I was going to say something else. Well, I don't know. So this guy looks kind of Yul Brynner-ish or whatever a little bit, but even more, a little more ethnic. But we're realizing through genetics now and things that, of course, that would be Yul Brynner and the other way, definitely. So let's get into this. This is Menace and the starting of Egypt we're talking about, not something that would have been around this, which had to have been past the 15th dynasty to have had these horses. It almost looks like something on Thutmose or something around the age of King Tut. Of course, King Tut never even got quite to this age that's here. So let's look into this. For the idea here is Menace. Legends say he united Egypt under its first dynasty, but did he even exist? And so the question is posed. Much like the ancient Romans had Romulus and Remus to thank for the foundation of their civilizations, so too did the ancient Egyptians have a legendary figure that united the upper and lower lands, known as King Menes. And like the Roman brothers, there's much mythology tied into Menes' story, and we'll get into a little bit of that here in a minute. Controversy also surrounds the king, with scholars questioning if Menes was his real name or if he even existed. And we've done a few videos about this, and anybody that studied this finds that it comes back to a guy. Well, his name might be Narmer, and it might be Menes, and there's this king scorpion, and apparently a scorpion too, and these other things. And people say, well, they're equating that to these first kings that were right there in the first place, and so this guy is Scorpion and this is this. In fact, Horaha is supposed to be Horus the Younger, but at the same time is supposed to maybe be Scorpion, and so Scorpion 2 would even come after. Now Horaha is listed on the king's list as being the second ever and after this person, but there's some discrepancy there on whose king's list, Manetho or the Turin list or whatever that you go off of. But there are other lists that actually go before that date. But everybody says that's in mythology. For also, very much like the Sumerians again, they have this concept where that's whenever the gods were ruling, and then it kicks at a certain point, and then there are just priest kings and so on that took over the dynasties, right? So Menes means he who endures, and that's what this next part is about. But that's what it effectively means, and it's also what it means kind of for the Minoans and King Minos and men and what it means there, and the enduring, he who endures. And we're all men, well, women and men, and we endure. So there's another somewhat connection of the name and what it could mean. In food circles, in fish, there's this tetramin food, and the essence of vitamins in it, and it's what it's made you to think of. But also linguistically, it breaks down to this helps keep your fish alive and endure 4 different ways. The nutritional balance is there for it. Certain fish are going to eat high protein diets and only get the stuff like bugs fall in the water and things like that. And so they're only going to get the other part of their nutrition because the bug was eating that type of stuff. Let's not go there. Menes appears in several ancient texts. He is the first human king after the divine and demigod rulers in the Turin canon, as I said, and has the first cartouche in the Abydos Kings list of Seti I. And we've done a video about Seti I and Sethites and what that means, and even back in the very first and origin that brings that about was Seth Peribsen. And he is second dynasty instead of second king ever, second dynasty. The Ramesseum Min reliefs also names Menes as the first king of Egypt. It's worth noting that Menes is, however, absent on a seal listing the first 6 rulers of the first dynasty that was found at al-Kab. In fact, nothing that has been found from the time Menes would have lived names him as a king. So it's almost like it could be a name or an epitaph instead. We'll get into that a little bit here. One explanation, though, is that the kings in the early dynastic period were identified by a Horus name and not a private name. Well, it gets, thick with names and titles and epitaphs as they go on through it. But they're given a Horus name, but they actually had a real name to begin with, but then they're given a Horus name, and quite often these names, as you can tell, follow each other, and Ramses and II, and Seti II, and Tutmosis, and all these names that reoccur over again, because you're kind of saying that you're like him or following in the guise of, and situations like that. Genetics might reveal that the thought is true that Seth was a redhead, and much like Ginger, the pre-dynastic Gibelline mummy that's been found, and is in the, well, it's not recent either, it's been in the British Museum for 100 years, but Sethites are supposed to have been redheads like Typhon, and he's listed in stuff as being a blue-eyed, red-headed person. This also follows the Typhon and these things that I've talked about in other videos. But also Seti is shown as to have been a redhead. But also Ramses is too, and it makes you wonder if Aries and the time of the ram has something to do with it, and why. The thing that's conspicuous is knowing what they look like and what hair they possibly had and their lineages, why it doesn't follow straight 1, 2, 3, 4, but it goes 1, 2, and then it changes to Tutmosis and everything, and then there's Ramses 3, and it's his kid. Was it a redhead? Is that how it works out? And people have made, papers about it. I even showed a video about it last year where they were talking about it in a paper. And then Joanne Fletcher, famous Egyptologist lady here, that is a somewhat auburn or redhead, had shown all the types of hair and everything and stuff, and done a video about that. But also, there was a video that I did that showed the genetic signature that they had on them and how they had looked at it under a microscope and figured out Ramses was a redhead and that Seti was, and different lineages down through there that were blonde and redheads, including Thuya and Yuya, which I recently did a video on. It's not long ago. Take a look at it, and they're both blonde haired. And people have often said, oh, well, that changes because of the natron. Well, they put hair in natron and tried to make it happen and overdid it even, and it didn't even change one single bit. It doesn't make them a little less curly or a little more curly or anything. It doesn't do anything really to hair necessarily. So it's worth noting that he is absent, though, in that one area, and it's a strange thing. We'll get into it here a little bit, but there's this epitaph that they use, and it shows up on a lot of people then. And so, one group likes to think that, well, that means they're all related to Menes originally, and the other group says, no, that means Menes is an epitaph because everybody's got it, throwing that on there like they do when they say he is the Horus of this and these other things, whenever he sure as hell ain't Horus. Man, that's a nice looking guitar. Paul Reed Smith. Nice guitar. So here's cartouche of Menes. And it's the very first one. And again, we find that loop of rope, and we've talked about this, and that same loop of rope being shown with the solar disk with the wings on it, people all the way through the Fertile Crescent, how it connects. But Cartouche of the Menes on the Abydos king's list. Menes was a man of many names. Manetho's chronology of the 3rd century BC names him as Menes, but two Egyptian 19th dynasty kings list write his name as Mene, with an I at the end. And of course, there is that Greek thing where they like to put US or IS on it, but to put ES on the end of it as opposed to that is not as common, but still used for deification of people. The Greek historian Herodotus called him Men, and he was Menas to another Greek historian, which is Diodorus Siculus. Even Jewish historian Josephus gives him yet another name, Meneaus. Throws a whole lot of little vowels in the middle of that. But then there's that OS at the end of it. So it's Meneos, if you will. And this all has that same concept into it, but Herodotus called him Men. Well, if he was Men and then Greekified, it would be Menace, or Menes, or Menas. But then we start to get to Manasseh and all these names that come out of this too, Oding, and how they really mean pretty much the same thing. I'm going to go out in left field if I don't stop myself. Let's do that. Lost city of Thinis, first capital of United Egypt. Abydos Kings List is a trove of information preserving the identities of 76 kings of ancient Egypt. Mummy of Pharaoh Ramses II issued a passport to travel to France. Yeah, because he was like a live body or a cadaver, and so they did it like that. Many modern scholars suggest that the name Menes, which means he who endures, may actually be a reference to Menes being a figure that encompassed all of the kings that worked to unify Egypt, but not everyone agrees. So the concept here is that the name he who endures, it's like to say they who endured. That there was a bunch of Civil Warish fighting going on, and people have agreed to it. But what came out of it, and though they don't have the names correctly, so eventually they just took it and put that epitaph on saying the ones from before. Well, that would work good, except for there's a couple of places where they can find the list and it goes way, way back, and then they talk about it having going back to, 36,000 years, But this, of course, goes back into a time of kings, which it just mentioned, and the demigods, and so on, because these people have been deified. So, again, it's ancestor veneration, just like Caesar becomes a god and Titus becomes the second coming of Jesus. These people are deified, right? And in fact, Dios is Proto-Indo-European. We've talked about how Dios Pater, and that's Jupiter, and how that works out, and there were no J. Let's continue. But see, no, not everyone agrees that if he was the guy that did it, or if there was a group of people and it all is, something else, or if he was not. Now, there's one guy who had a good idea about it, because one of those lists, a couple of names back, has a name which is somewhat like Men, and they're saying that, well, maybe that was the Men guy, and he tried to unify it, but it all fell apart again. For there are some people that believe that Egypt came all, well, even what we know of it, it came all together and had the first intermediate period, which looks like it was caused by a volcano, and I've done a video about that. It caused the drought and the problems. But they have a second period, and then they have a second intermediate period, and then the New Kingdom, and so on too. So it has little flops in it, but the pre-dynastic looks like it may have like a old lawnmower trying to get going and sputtered and quit a couple of times. And then they got the thing up and running, and it ran a little bit and then killed, and then ran a little bit longer and then killed, and then ran a little longer. If you get the little idea I'm presenting. So this is one statue that's shown here off in this pink granite that is supposed to have been a statue of Menace. And this was found by Flinders Petrie, a famous Egyptologist. And it would give weight if they didn't actually say that, well, this thing was found in a Cairo market from a bootlegger trying to sell it. So somebody had looted and found things, and there's no actual connection to a dig site or anything, but he just thought that it might be. There's no name on it or anything like that. It somewhat has the, what you would try to call a red crown on the top of it for it coming up like that, but looks like it's, doesn't even have the rest of the part to it. And a lot of people said that's more of a priest thing than anybody. But it's thought to be the first dynastic king of Egypt. Now, Menace or Narmer, Egyptologist Flinders Petrie believed it was the later. What's funny about that is there's a lot of epitaphs and things that have led to a person named Narmer, and there are more connections to Narmer having really been a person than there is of Menace having ever been a person. There's little that can be said of Menace's life for certain. However, it is generally agreed that if he existed, he was born in either Hyrcanopolis, Nekhen, which is city of the sun, or Thinis, and he ruled sometime about 3000 BC to 3100 BC. Ancient sources also tend to agree that he ruled for more than 60 years. And that's a strange fact too, so you think about it, he must have been quite young. No one wants to say teen, so let's call him 20 years old, and so he lived to be 80 years old. And whenever he was 20, he was the head of an army enough that people got behind him and nobody else that had any tenure whatsoever. Think about that. That people have said that the average human life back then lasted less than 40 years on average. That's an average, so popcorn, you get big numbers every once in a while. Did you get 80? That's entirely possible, but would this kid have been 20 years old then, at the time that he unified Egypt? Is that even possible? Think about that logically. Is that really even possible? Well, everybody loved Elvis, and he was young and stuff, and yeah, but he wasn't going to end up being the king of the world. He's the king of rock and roll. Took over the world. Oh, no, he didn't. No. So what are your thoughts about that? Let me know down in the comments and stuff, but that's a big series of debate. In fact, what if Menace is meant to signify 3 or 4 of these people's reign that lasted about 60 years? Wouldn't that make more sense? And if it was to deify the ones that had led up to the Narmer, that had actually done the Narmer palette, for it's not called the Menace palette, it's called the Narmer palette. It led up to that exact moment, because that is the point that they point to the unification of Egypt. For on one side he has one hat, one the other. The fight is shown there and he wins and everything, and I've done a video about the Narmer palette. And it's a nice guitar. I've done a video series about the origins of ancient Egypt and the people of the Nakada series and their tombs before there ever was tombs of Egypt like people are thinking of nowadays, and how they had plaster walls and everything on them. In fact, this is one of the main scenes that I show in it. It tells you this is an ancient neck-in tomb painting in plaster with barks, staffs, goddesses, and animals, possibly the earliest example. And I went into detail onto it, but just to show you, man, I don't want to get too close in here, but just to show you, God, it did that crap. So let's see if I can just get out of it again and get it to reload. Okay, that kind of ruins the ambience, but let's look again at where we were. It's probably going to jump from loading a picture, but down here in that picture, it shows a bunch of fighting that goes on and things. And what some guys deciphered is that this is not all one scene, but this is a scene, and this is a scene, and this is a scene, and it says stuff, and this is a scene, and it looks like these people come here in these boats led by this guy, and he comes in and does this thing. Somebody ends up dead. Then all of a sudden, this master of beasts show up. If you look at that here, he's holding two lions. I know it probably just looks like a stick in the thing, but straight up from there, that red thing, red ochre, it's a stick. Well, he's holding up two lions, so it's that master of beasts thing. It's very Sumerian-ish. In fact, these boats don't look correct for there, but it matches the ones on the cave walls and stuff that go along with it. And there's that bent prow that you find in both of them. And it shows the cattle in this group over here and this guy that is triumphant. And somewhere in here there was a goddess that's holding her arms up in that ballerina pose that's all shown in the pre-dynastic art and stuff. And there's people on a boat, like something happened on a boat. Or this one right here, it all happened on a boat. Anyhow, check out that video if you'd like to go more deep into that. Let's see if I can get this back to right. Not quite. Close enough. So apart from those aspects of his life, there are many stories that seem to mix fact with myth. Combine that with a lack of archaeological evidence, and it's near impossible to ascertain more details of Menace's life. This had led some to question if he was a real historical figure or if King Menace solely acted as a legendary founding father and hero for ancient Egyptians. Once you figure in where they're stuck on this idea that he ruled for 60 years, then you must pull him up to the fact where he was the hero of ancient Egyptians and blah, 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 and 20 years old at the time of doing it. So is this something like Conan the Barbarian, and instead of rejecting the kingdom and going on with his story and eventually ruling a kingdom of his own, like it shows in it, he decided to stick around with a girl? How does it make it to where he gets to be part of it? You know, you can have a warrior king situation, guys, but it just doesn't seem to make sense to everybody that looks at it. In another theory, as others suggest, Menes was the personification of the Nakada three rulers, Ka, Scorpion II, and Narmer. And these were individual people, or perhaps some of those are two together. Narmer in particular has been singled out as the pharaoh who inspired the story of Menes, and so we have Narmer. Now in the Louvre they have an exhibit of Narmer's head, and it doesn't look like that, and it actually says Narmer on it. And while one eye is missing, much like Nefertiti, the other eye is still blue inlaid lapis lazuli eye, and he has not just a chin beard, but a thicker beard. In fact, his arms are clasped, and his arms have been broke off, but they're clasped in the center of his body where his hands were together, and it's actually the statue of the Sumerian priest king. Now they've hooked up and said that this is the same as the one that they found in Susa, like on the other side edge of ancient Sumerians, edge of Zagros Mountains. Yeah, those people, yeah. And so not only was there trade and knowing of this person at this ancient time and that far away, well, they had to get the lapis lazuli from somewhere. Well, even that early? Yes. In fact, it looks like this unification that happens from the Sumerians, from these people, from Elam, if you will, or whatever, and made a unification. And some archaeologists have gone to the point of showing and pointing this out, but not enough people agree with the concept. But once you look at everything all in together, it seems to point towards it being, let's just say that it points towards it having more substance than many of the other theories. For the other ones, just the way, like, well, he was a king and they didn't write much about him and I walk off. And it's like, that doesn't have, that soup is just water. But then again, it may be. So here's this piece that they've found, and of course these are these labels, and I'll tell you now, the labels are made out of ivory and they're thin, and they've had to boil this ivory and then peel off a perfect piece of it, perhaps with obsidian weapons or whatever. And in peeling it off, they cut it up into cubes and then put all these symbols onto it. So this is not an inexpensive venture. And a lot of them they would just take a piece of clay, like a ball, like a golf ball, and stick the ropes that connect or close the jars and stuff, and then push it and mush a stamp into it, or a seal, or, you know, cartouche type thing. So what we're looking at here is this, and this is a recreation of it. And then what we're going to look at is this little bitty thing, as if we're looking at it under a microscope. And this is the MN being shown inside of it and connecting it to it. Now, what's strange about this is the label mentioning Horaha along with the MN sign. So is this saying that Horaha is Menace? Because if that is, then that's actually the second pharaoh ever that we know of, and Narmer would have been the first. And that makes him his son. Kind of fits, but Egyptologists, because of what others had said when they first started doing it, still to this day disagree. And you think over time you get it all figured out, but some things like that hamper people figuring it all out. But other people are saying, well, you're not figuring it all out, you're making a mess of it. It's still a mess right now. The well-known Egyptologist Flinders Petrie believed that Menes was actually just a title, not a personal name, and said Narmer was the first real Egyptian pharaoh. So what's strange is whenever they showed that statue earlier, and he said that he supposedly got this statuette that had said it was Menes in some Cairo market from an illegal smuggler, and try to put weight out of that. It's amazing if you look into what Petrie said in some of these earliest Egyptologists, it kind of ruins other people's little bubble. It's true that some of the stories line up. For example, Narmer is also credited with having completed the process of unifying Upper and Lower Egypt also. So is this a lawnmower trying to get going, sputter, sputter, could go? And then later they throw those names in there on the list because they're unsure of it? Because when you step back just into this era here, you get to the point where there are symbols, but there's no written language. So Narmer is accredited with having completed the process too. And so people say, oh, Narmer is Menes. And it's like, well, it's easy to throw that all together, but they say it's not in their own writing. In fact, Hor-Aha's got this attached to him, so you want to do that? Or no, you don't want to do Although some ancient sources have also accredited Aha with this, it says. Yeah, isn't that amazing? And let me grab that. Seriously? I bump it out of line? Sorry, guys. And so, what do y'all think at this point? Did he even exist? I mean, there's much to question, at least to some point here. So Pharaoh Menace unifies Egypt. Well, the biggest accomplishment that's been credited to Menace is this unification of Egypt, right? Let's see if I can get that down there. There we go. The biggest accomplishment is accredited to Menace is that unification of Egypt. It has been said that King Menace used both political strategy to force to do so. Both. A possible marriage with a member of the southern royal family has been named as one of the ways he unified Upper and Lower Egypt, but there's no proof for that. But it would have been one way it really worked. You know, that Romeo married Juliet and then the Capulets and the Montagues get along a lot better. Kind of ends that Hatfields and the McCoy situation, if you will. Once the lands were joined, policies were put in action to maintain peace and bring order to this realm. And so this is whenever something actually happens to the point that it does have unity. And in a lot of thoughts I give to it, people, I say, well, it sputtered and tried to get going, but somebody took and twisted that little thing and got it just right, and then did it again, and it fired right up and started going. And that's what carried us through Dynasty Zero, through the first dynasties, right? And it may not have ever fell apart had there not been that volcano and the drought that ended up ruining it. For right after it ruined it, people quit doing pyramids and a lot of things happened, and it took a while for them to ever get back to the point of them being able to do something like that if they chose to do so, and they chose not to because it took too much resources out of them. And then later, some of these Greeks and other people are talking crap about it, like, oh man, he pushed people to the nth degree, oh, he did this, oh, he even hoarded his daughter just to get bricks made, you know, and just silly shit. So while it sounds great to have one king have managed such an incredible feat, most historians agree that there were probably several rulers who worked overtime and to eventually reach that goal. Yet the naming of one central figure as having completed the arduous task would have been important to the ancient Egyptians. In this light, Menes acts as a beginning in history for the ancient Egyptians. You can see that concept, right? This is the Narmer palette, though, not the Menace palette. And take a quick overview and look at the shape of this thing. I've surprised quite a few people that have been into this before, telling them, you see what that is? I'm like, oh, it's a makeup palette or this, that, and the No, that's an arrowhead. Look, here's a point, it goes up, bends in, has the knobs on it. I used to have a necklace. It's where you tie it right here. In fact, even looking at it, let me try to get it better. Yeah, it's been thinned right in here real good so that there would be a shaft to be able to be stuck onto it. Was it ever used in that way? No. I'm just telling you that it's a cool palette, but it's also been made in the shape an arrowhead. And people talk about Hathor and this, that, and the other. Well, this is Hathor here, right at the very top of it. And so, oh no, that's Satan. Oh no, it's a cow god thing. People need to quit that crap. It's all bullshit. Here's that symbol that we're talking about earlier, though, thrown up right on the top of it here. But it's a Narmer symbol. Now here's the white crown. And on the other side he has the red crown, and people have talked about all kinds of things going along with this. And I mentioned whenever I take this apart, so I don't want to do it right now in my other videos about it, that here we are hooking the nose of this thing, but this is the symbol of Lower Egypt, the papyrus, and this is the Sphinx, it seems. And so the Sphinx used to look like this, and then whenever they made the Pharaoh concept of it, they took and lopped that off because it eroded so bad and put on brand new and dug all around it and ended up making the rest of the Sphinx. Makes sense. I don't want to go there. Here's a mace. Here's a man in the Orion position already and smiting his foe. In fact, this is the smiting side of the Narmer palette. Here's a priest. known at the time as a sandal bearer. People have wondered what that is in his hands, and that's his sandals, because he's on hallowed ground now and not wearing his shoes, a la Moses and the tree and all that. But he also carries with him a little pitcher of water in case his Pharaoh gets thirsty here. People have made a big deal, too, about, well, a lot of people haven't, but a few have made a big deal about this little pot leaf looking 8-pointed star that's definitely looking like the Sumerian star, and who this might be a priest of in situation, how this all works together, and definitely not apart. I've always thought this effigy, and even the other one of him here on the side, kind of gives that Elvis look to his face with a little chin beard, right? What else can I tell you here? Oh yeah, he's also got a little foxtail, an oxtail type of tail that's on him here, indicating that he is the bull and all that, and blah blah blah. And of course, this is Age of Taurus coming into Aries, and then things change as far as that goes too. But there are already Arians quite in effect. The smiting side of the Narmer palette. Scholars have interpreted this as representation of the pharaoh conquering Lower Egypt. Menace's other achievements. Well, hope I don't go into double here. Menace's other achievements. He has been credited with many other accomplishments in the ancient Egyptian culture, including the introduction of sacrifice and worshiping of the gods. That would have been Thoth. It has been said that the Golden Age set in after Egypt was unified, and that positive period has also been attributed to Menace, like a Golden Age. For example, Pliny explains or claims that Menace introduced papyrus and written script to the ancient Egyptians, and again, that really is Thoth. Diodorus Siculus wrote that he was the first Egyptian lawgiver. Manetho wrote that Menace as a strong warrior that expanded his kingdom and borders and then provided a sense of order. And so he is to lay down the law and the rules, much like a Moses character. In the term papyrus and also Herodotus history, Menace is said to have had a dam constructed in the Nile to divert the flow over the land where Memphis lies. He's credited with founding the city and making it luxurious. But a 2012 discovery of a relief describing the visit of a pre-dynastic ruler to Memphis in the early 32nd century means that this story is nothing more than a tall tale, and the Greeks are full of tall tales and hearsay too. Herodotus is full of hearsay, and quite often he tells you that, well, they said this and they said that. Well, they said he came here and founded this city, and though he may have built a little park here and put a statue up, the city was already there beforehand, and that's what they're indicating here with this. So regardless, as Memphis as a capital for Egypt was a good choice. The land around it was fertile, and its location was strategic. In that city, Menace allegedly taught the residents to live elegant, luxurious lives, ones that included less work and more time for hobbies, and even beautiful cloths covering couches and tables. For many of Menace's people, life was good, food was plenty, and peace was prevalent. And this thought of an idea of how once it came together right, how all of a sudden, nobody went with the idea before, but once it came together, that they had this prosperity that neither could deny, and so it kept it in. Weird things come to mind, but the Civil War of America. South was doing great, North was doing great, but needed to be together, couldn't be put together. Should happen, if you will, but it broke back in. But once they became unified, here comes Industrial Revolution, blah, 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 TV, computers, spaceman. And it continues. So now we're going on to crocodiles, and we're just going to take a quick glance how much more I have here for part 2. So we have just that. Man, I could almost get it in there, but I can't. We're at 43 minutes. So I tell you what, guys, we're going to go ahead and end it here. We'll go on to part 2. It's in your top left-hand corner. And so it should be popping up now. And when we go to it, we'll start off at this point. Like, share, and subscribe before you go. Leave a little note if you will. Peace.